because we really have had no true time to recover. Other questions or thoughts? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have something you want to ask or comment on. Okay. All right. So let's talk about brains. I hope that there is not a neurologist on this call right now. If there is, please forgive me for this really, really bad brain overview I'm going to give you. But it's important for us to understand that what our brains are doing is actually, oh, damn. Susan just said, yeah, there is. It's important for us to understand what our brains are doing in this time. So our brains are basically really oversimplified, more primitive in the back and more sophisticated in the front. The back of your brain is more about survival. The front of your brain is more about thinking. Now that's really oversimplified. But there is an area in the back of your brain whose job it is to look for threats. Norm, if I don't come back to that, post it again, okay? Because I want to hold that for just a second. There's an area in the back of your brain whose job it is to look for threats and keep you alive. That is its job. And so if the car is coming down the road at you and you think it's going to hit you, that part of your brain does not say, I wonder how fast that car is going, and I wonder if they're going to turn before they get to me. That part of your brain says, jump onto the grass, jump into the woods, jump off away from that car. It doesn't think, it reacts. And the point of that is to keep you alive. What's supposed to happen when there's a kind of an instant crisis like that is that the back of your brain gets you off the street, and then the front of your brain, once the car goes by, says things to you to calm you down. And now here we're reacting and here we're thinking. So the thinking part of my brain then says, I hate people who drive pickup trucks, or I really shouldn't have been walking on this street, or something that by using words calms the system down. This is the way brains are supposed to work. There's an alert and then there's a calming. In COVID, we have not had an opportunity for the calming. And one of the ways that one of the things we do to calm down is we sleep, or we eat, or we do all sorts of things that actually bring down our emotional temperature. Those are not working for us. Now, part of the reason they're not working for us is because so sleeping, for example, if you're at risk, sleeping is actually dangerous, because if you're, put yourself in your 16th century brain, not your 21st century brain, because your brain is not really different. Your 16th century brain says, I heard bears outside, or I hear bears, and I should not sleep deeply because the bear could come and hurt me. And so what happens in our sleep cycle is that instead of us going through a sleep cycle into another, we go through a sleep cycle and we wake up. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not had a decent night's sleep in 9 months. I have nights where I say to myself, oh, it wasn't awful. But sleeping is one of the things that can make me at risk. And so what our bodies do, our brains do, in an attempt to keep us alive, is we sleep less deeply. So a couple of components of that. One is you remember your dreams more. You're not dreaming more. You're just remembering your dreams more because your sleep is more disrupted. We really know people dream all the time. There are very few people. I don't know of research that says there are people who don't dream, but most of us don't remember our dreams because we don't wake up. But COVID makes us wake up because this part of our brain in the back that's fear driven says, you better wake up. This is not a safe place. So we are which means that the recovery time, and then of course, what happens is you wake up and you say to yourself, I can't sleep, I'll never sleep again, I can't, what am I going to do tomorrow? Which of course just makes it worse. So we see diminished sleep, we see diminished pleasure, we see an increase in eating. If this part of your brain in the 16th century brain it's really much more older than that, but if the 16th century brain says you're at risk, historically the greatest risk to human life has been famine. So we eat more. So that that COVID-19 is about this part of your brain saying, I want to save my life. Jess, can I ask you to say this out, what you shared with me out loud, so that people understand exactly what is going on? I think you've given a much better definition than I have, and I don't know where you are. So,
sure.
There you are. Go ahead, Jess. Thank you.
So one of the things that most people are experiencing right now is something called alpha wave intrusion. And so when you sleep, your brain processes and produces different waves. Alpha waves are primarily produced when you're trying to fall asleep. It's not when you're fully asleep, it's not when you're fully conscious. They're waves that are still processing what's going around you, but they're not deep sleep waves. And people who study sleep measure sleep cycles based on the level of different waves. And so when you have alpha waves going, frequently what that's called is stage 1 non-REM sleep. And so REM sleep, that's when you're having, so that's rapid eye movement. That's when you're dreaming. That's when you're having those really vivid dreams. The non-REM sleep phases are when you are really winding down your body. That's when you're shutting everything down. And the goal is to get to stage 4 non-REM sleep. That's where you process emotions. That's where you process memories into long-term memory. That's where things like healing take place. And when you have alpha wave intrusion, that prevents you from getting into stage 4 non-REM sleep. And so what's happening is a lot of people are experiencing these decreases in their memory, in their emotional processing, and in their physical responses, their healing abilities, their immune system responses. And it can be incredibly disorientating, and it leads to this accumulation of what's called a sleep debt, that you are missing rest and that you are not meeting your rest needs.
Wonderful, thank you. That's a much better explanation than the one I gave you. And so what happens when we develop a sleep debt is all sorts of COVID brain, that we can't think as clearly, that we can't think as, we don't have access to the most logical parts of our brain as easily. And we do really dumb things. I was teaching this in a class. Brain fog is the more traditional name for it. I like COVID brain. And somebody asked me recently, and maybe you know the answer to this, is this the same thing that is happening with chemo brain? How much of chemo brain is related to anxiety and stress, and how much of it is actually related to chemo? I don't know the answer to that, but I thought it was a great question.
If you want a little bit of an answer to that, people who struggle with various things that can produce brain fog, a lot of times there's dysfunction in the autonomic nervous system, and it can cloud some of these things. And it's exactly the same thing that's happening with COVID brain. A lot of people are experiencing symptoms of dysautonomia that they've never had before.
That's great. So that makes lots of sense. So what happens when you have COVID brain is that you do all sorts of things which are really out of character. And then that comes back to that definition of trauma, where I don't feel like myself, and I feel disconnected from myself. So I was teaching this in a class at Hebrew Union College, and I said to my students, give me examples of COVID brain. And one student said that he got in the shower with his kippah on and couldn't figure out what was wrong with it with his head because he was literally shampooing his kippah. We all thought that was pretty funny until another student said she got in the shower completely dressed. And we thought that was pretty funny until another student said she stirred rice with her cell phone, which we all agreed was the winner. But my guess is that if you think about your experiences of COVID brain, that you've had lots of little ones and big ones. Whether it's a simple example for me is, aside from not ever knowing what day of the week it is, but that I think might have other causes. I can't remember from the morning to the afternoon what's on my calendar. And if it's not on my calendar, I don't remember it at all. I have historically had a really, really, really good memory for what's coming next. It's just, I don't have it. And so I check my calendar many more times a day than I would have historically done. And if you have great examples of COVID brain, please share them with your community. Stick them in the chat box, not in direct message, but for all of you, so that you can share your giggles, because my guess is that every one of you has had a COVID brain experience, or two, or three, or four, that it's probably even more, is more than just letting the hard-boiled egg water boil out. So if you have a COVID brain experience, I'd love to see it. So what we see is, because this part of our brain is working overtime and this part of our brain is not working overtime, the cognitive, really truly cognitive part of our brain, what we see is a number of things. One is that we are much more likely to be emotionally triggered. We're much more likely to get angry, to get upset, to get weepy, find things funny that are not really as funny as we thought they were. They wouldn't normally be as amusing as they are right now. We have trouble making decisions, because decisions involve using that cognitive part of your brain over the fear-driven part of your brain. We have difficulty sometimes with voluntary behaviors. That there's a big difference between the things I choose to do and the things that just I do, my body just does. Voluntary behaviors become more difficult. It's harder to understand things, like why did somebody say that, or why did I do that? Because again, I'm not thinking as clearly. And we see that people, that we feel this sense of being under threat all the time, which makes us more reactive. It's also the thing that makes us hoard. It's really not that I thought I needed, 4 cases of toilet paper. It's that that's not the logical brain part. That's the fear brain part. And so the hoarding comes because I'm afraid. It doesn't come because I'm a bad person and I'm just trying to make sure you don't have any toilet paper because I want it all. It's fear. We also see that people are more impulsive, that we have more difficulty in our relationships writ large. There's been a well-documented increase in domestic violence, both spousal and child abuse. There are also, a well-documented increase in divorce filings. As a part of that, I think it's really important for us to notice that none of us ever expected to spend this much time with the people we live with. That whether either because you become a parent or because you choose a partner, or because you're living with your own parents, we are spending more time with the human beings in our homes than we ever expected to. And even when you go on vacation, you don't spend this much time with people. You're not with them 24/7. There is no real respite, and particularly for people who are in smaller homes, there is no real respite. And so relationships are really challenged by this amount of time together. Time together and intimacy are really different. We use the word intimacy as though it has a single meaning. I really am convinced that we each have a tolerance level for intimacy, that some of us really want to glom on to other people, and others of us like to live more parallel lives. And that it's not written anywhere that the closer you are, the better it is. What's true, much more true, is that when you are close to people who like the same amount of closeness that you do, that it works better. That if intimacy is on a scale of 1 to 10, if I'm a 4, I'm going to find an 8 overwhelming, and they're going to find me distant. And that it's not that the goal is to be more intimate, it's to be intimate enough and not too intimate. And that is often a moving target. As we've been stuck in our homes, some of us without respite, that tension between what is comfortable for me and what is comfortable for you has, for many of us, come to a head. I think that really is an essential part of one of the things that we're struggling with, is that we need each other more, but we may not need each other this much. For people who are living alone, there are other issues that come up. There are issues of isolation, there are issues of fear. What if I fall and nobody knows? Those are real issues. What if I get sick? Who can I call? And I actually think that this is one of the spaces that a religious community is incredibly important, to create kinds of phone trees and to build and maintain relationships. Not all of us are good at that, and I think those people who are good at it should be tasked with it, and the people who are not good at it should not be tasked with it. It's very clear to me that when people are lonely, if they are passive in their loneliness, it gets worse, and if they are active in their loneliness, it gets better. But that doesn't mean that that all of us can do that. So if I presume that if I'm lonely, somebody else is lonely, which is a pretty good assumption, then I can reach out to that person and potentially do something for them and myself. If I presume that I'm lonely and therefore nobody likes me, that's a spiral down that is really hard for anybody else to interrupt. And as a parenthetical to that, there is very good anecdotal data, not real data, that talks about the amount of stress that our clergy and other Jewish professionals are feeling as they try to hold everybody else's pain. That part of what helpers do is that they are people who generally can hold other people's pain and manage that experience, but that over this 9-month period, holding other people's pain without respite is really, really difficult. And I'm going to suggest to you, as clearly as I possibly can, that your Jewish professionals also really need to find ways to have their own pain held. You may not be able to do that, but their shoulders are sagging because they've worked very, very hard. Okay, so I want to, and the other thing that happens because of this brain stuff is that we're all regressing. It's really easy to think about regression in toddlers, then they start having tantrums and their toilet training changes and they can't sleep through the night, like us. but we are all regressing, and I think we actually had a second bout of regression after the election when it didn't make us feel better. And I think we need to be really forgiving of ourselves and of other people, because none of us do this well. We're actually not designed to tolerate and live with this amount of angst all the time. Questions, and then I will go back to those questions on the side. Questions, comments, ideas, aside from take good care of your clergy. Norm asked about how to shut off the trauma. One of the things I did very, very early in COVID that I do not think I'm going to give up was I shut off alerts. My kids were were with us for Thanksgiving, and we were joking about how literally every news station has breaking news across the bottom. All news is breaking news. That is, that there's a message that everything is a crisis and everything is urgent. All news is not breaking news. And if I don't get the news alert, it will not change anything. So that actually is a way in which I'm saying to the world, you may not intrude upon me. The question of whether or not it's effective, that's really, is it effective for you? How much do you have a sense of mastery by having knowledge? Or how much do you have a sense of intrusion by having knowledge? And so if for you, having those news alerts feels like I have mastery, I know what's happening in the world, hold on to them. For me, that did not feel good. And so I said to myself, it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it. I think that a lot of the changes that we can be making in self-care are really actually very small. And it's less about the action and more about the way in which I label it. And I'll give you an example. Again, it's a personal example because it's easiest to come from what I know inside. I am a water baby. I love the water. I like to take baths. I like to take showers. I like to be in the ocean. I'm a water baby. I'm also very efficient. And historically, I take a shower until I get clean, and then I get out of the shower. But one of the things I have been doing since the beginning of this is saying to myself, I like water. And so I'm going to stand in the shower for an extra 2 minutes because I'm worth it. And for me, that is actually very powerful and useful. It might not be powerful and useful for you. What each one of us does that feeds us is personal. And so I could give you prescriptions for things to do, but I actually think you know what to do. What feeds you? Does reading feed you? Does walking feed you? Does cooking feed you? Whatever do crafts feed you? What feeds you are the things that not only should you be doing, but you should be saying to yourself, I'm doing this because it feeds me and I'm worth it. Because the labeling of it actually is hugely important. Anxiety is a contagious disease. Anxiety is absolutely a contagious disease. I want to parse the difference between stress and anxiety. They're actually quite different. Stress is the thing that makes me act, and anxiety is the thing that paralyzes me. So stress is not innately bad. Stress is the thing that made me get on this call five minutes early, right? Because I don't want to be late. And in that way, stress is really useful. If what I did was I said to myself, I don't want to be late, I'm going to get on an hour and a half ahead of time. And then I'm going to spend that hour and a half worrying about where Susan is and why this isn't happening. I just create a spiral down. So anxiety isn't helpful. It's not healthy. Stress actually is helpful, and it is healthy, and it kicks up our immune system. And so um, don't be afraid of feeling this as stress. But when you start in that spiral down, the question is, how do you interrupt it? And it may be, and again, that's idiosyncratic. Each of us interrupts it in different ways. Andrea wants to know what regressing means. For adults, a lot of what regressing looks like is outbursts. We're not as likely to have toileting accidents, which is what 4-year-olds do. We're much more likely to have outbursts. If you see in yourself that you're behaving in ways which don't feel normal for you, that's probably an example of regressing. It's not that regressing is bad. I'm not saying that you shouldn't regress. I'm saying actually that it's pretty normal to regress under duress. And so if you do that and you call it what it is, and don't say to yourself, there's something terribly wrong with me, but say to yourself, look, here it goes. Here I go again. Then you find ways to feed yourself and to give yourself comfort. Rini wants to know about depression. And so in the same way that we use the word stress and anxiety interchangeably, and they're not, we use the word sadness and depression interchangeably, and they're not. It's totally reasonable and normal for all of us to be feeling a lot of sadness right now. People who are clinically depressed are actually, this experience is harder for people who are clinically depressed than it is for people who are not. With one really interesting exception, though I can't find percentages on this, it does appear that there is a subgroup of teenagers that is thriving because they're not going to school. That in fact, the kids who we have historically been the kids that we really worried about may be doing better under lockdown, and the kids that looked like they were, just golden kids are actually having a harder time. If you are a person who is fed by other people's admiration and you can't get it, or attention and you can't get it, this is much harder. If you're a person who actually does better with your blinders on, this may be a significant improvement. And I actually wonder whether or not, when all is said and done, we are going to come up with a parallel schooling opportunity for kids who really don't want to be in a building where people shove them into lockers. And because that's the subgroup that's doing better. People who are already dealing with anxiety, clinical anxiety, not stress, and clinical depression are, one of the things that they're saying is, yeah, so now you understand what it's like to live the way I live. That there is a sense that this has been my normal, and it's really interesting to me that you didn't know that this was my normal. There are definitely people where it's getting worse, I'm not seeing much that indicates that there's been a significant or increase in suicides, although there has clearly been a significant increase in suicidal thinking. And I do wonder what happens as we begin to come out of this, because in fact, the greatest risk for people successfully suiciding is when they start to feel better. It's not when they feel terrible, because then they have no energy, but when they begin to feel better, that's actually the highest risk for people for toxicity around suicide. A couple other thoughts. Well, I have 5 more minutes, so I want to make sure that there aren't other questions before I babble a little bit more. Anybody got something pressing? Okay. So communal trauma is different than individual trauma. one of the things that's different about communal trauma is that it makes it harder for me to listen to your trauma. Because when you talk about your trauma, it pulls up my trauma. This is part of the reason that our clergy is having so much difficulty, is that they're not just holding your pain, they're also holding their pain. And holding pain is really hard work over time. The assumption that we make is that our traumas are the same. They're not. That which is happening to you, it may look on the surface like the same thing is happening to both of us, but it's not. And it actually is really important for us to have people who can hear us talk about what's happening in our lives. And for whom we can do the same thing. The trauma experience also changes over time. Thank you, Rabbi. I didn't see that. Nancy, go ahead. I did not see your hand. Can you unmute?
Thank you,
Of
Doctor.
course.
My question is, how do you forgive someone who has caused you trauma in your past life? Or because if it's still like, if you still may think about it, so why didn't I do that, or how could I have done that better, type of
Great
thing.
question. Great
Especially
question.
in this time of with the COVID and all that too. Like you said, your emotions are different, and that's true. I think I've experienced a lot of those emotions that you are talking about. So we appreciate that. But
Good. So I have two responses to that. First of all, old trauma is pulled up by new trauma. So that when you are in a new traumatic situation, there's the memory of old traumas comes up. So I will tell you that in the first probably month of this, almost all my dreams were about a particular old trauma. So it's hard to separate current trauma from old trauma because where it's happening in the way our brains work. I don't believe that the goal with trauma can ever be to get over it, because that's not how human beings are built. To manage my life with it is a very different statement. And I think if we tell ourselves, look, if we'd had 2 weeks of lockdown and then it had been over, we could have literally gone back to normal. There is no going back to that normal. I used to say to people all the time, when somebody in a couple has an affair, one of the things that everybody says is, I just want to go back the way it was. The way it was is gone. And it didn't work, but it's gone. The pre-COVID you is gone. And so the real question I think that faces us, and this is, I think, going to be a real question as we begin to come out of this, is what kind of meaning we make out of this, how we understand this experience, how we understand our relationships in this experience. If there is somebody who is, for example, unwilling or to respect the boundaries that you need to set for your own health, how do you make sense of being in relationship with that person now and in the future? I think that a friend of mine talks about COVID keepers, the things that we have learned that are really important to hold on to. For me, and I think for lots of people, one of the real COVID keepers has been figuring out who truly mattered and who occupied time. And that there are people in our lives who occupy time, but under this kind of duress would never be the people that I reach out to. And so I think that part of the COVID keepers is figuring out the meaning of the meaning of this in our lives is. And I want to say explicitly, we never finish that. Meaning making is not something that we ever get done with. It's kind of like when you go back to the Torah in the annual cycle, the piece you read yesterday and the piece you read last year, they have the same words. They don't mean the same thing. And because meaning making never stops. So I can't take the pain away, but what I do want to say is, first of all, the resurgence of old trauma is normal. And second of all, the goal is not to get over it. It's to integrate it into the way I understand myself in the world today, which
Okay, thank you.
I never finished doing.
That helps.
Sherry Ling, so
Yeah.
the question of whether or not other people's behavior is justifiable, I think that the real important question is, what am I going to expose myself to? I can't, one of the things I think is really important for us all is to know what I have power over and what I don't have power over. And if somebody says, I'm not going to isolate, or I'm not going to change, and I know that what they're doing, it endangers me, my job is to take care of me and the people who are closest to me. Go ahead. There's more to that thought. Go ahead, Sherry Ling.
First time it happened, I became a whistleblower. I talked to the local people, and a friend of mine actually called the local police. Just want to make sure he does the right thing. Okay. Like a good keeper. Okay. Because we both are caring person. Okay, and we justify our motives. Okay. And then it happened again. So I have to talk to people in charge of the organization, has different layers, to give a guideline in terms of when to do certain things. If a person tested positive, should that person show up again? Just in a few days, or should that person get a negative before that person can show up again, doing his job or her job or whatever?
So if it's institutional, that's very different than if it's personal. And in theory, the institution has an obligation to protect you. If you're going into a workplace, that's their job is to not put you in that position. That is not to say everybody does. And we are all in this position now of trying to navigate what is appropriate and what is safe and what is acceptable. And at this point, I think this is going to get even more complicated when some of us are vaccinated and others are not.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I'm going to be wearing, a scarlet V that says I'm safe. And then there are going to be people who get the first shot and not the second shot. I mean, we're going to see lots of craziness. Protect yourselves and the people you love, because that's the place where the power lies. I'm always frustrated when people see if I see the problem as external to me, then I have no power to change it. If I see the problem as something which I have where I have agency, I actually am empowered by even that way of thinking. It doesn't solve the problem. So I have already gone over, and I know that people have lunch plans and afternoon plans and sitting around the house plans. Rabbi Mark is going to put an email for me up in the chat if I can be helpful. It's Betsy Stone PhD. It's easy at Gmail. And I want to thank you for being here and giving up an hour of your day. And I really want to thank Susan and Rabbi for bringing me in. This is the closest I've ever been to Milwaukee. And I had a wonderful time being with you. So thank you. And have a wonderful afternoon.
And Betsy, we thank you, and we hope the time comes when you can really come to Milwaukee in person and not just virtually. It says somewhere in Pirkei Avot that your house is supposed to be a meeting place for the wise. It's supposed to sit at their feet and drink in their words to quench our thirst. And so thank you for helping us at this time when we really needed some wise words like this. And again, we hope you'll be able to come to our real house someday too.
Thank you. I would
Thank
love
you
that.
so much. Thank you.
Can I make a suggestion, actually? I'm a big believer in community. And so I'm going to get off, but I'm going to suggest to you that you don't have to rush off, and that you spend a little bit of time together thinking about either what you've learned or how it applies. I'm going to suggest that we could release the rabbi and cantor and educator, but you don't have to. But this is an opportunity. You've just spent an hour together. Don't go away because I'm going away. Stay together if you would like. So I'm going away, and I thank you for your time.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's even good to do that kind of things going into rooms, you know, in a group like this.
I would be remiss if I did not thank our committee who helped bring this weekend together. And Rabbi, if you can help, if I forget anyone, since I do not have the list in front of me, but let's see if I can do this. I would like to thank Rabbi Berkson. I would like to thank Lois Brasner. I would like to thank Dr. Sherry Blumberg. I would like to thank Sherry Malman. I would like to thank Audrey Berman. It's hard because I'm not seeing everyone on the screen. I would like to thank Benjamin Levin. And I know I'm missing someone. Am I missing someone? Audrey, Sherry, Benjamin, Lois, Rabbi. Am I missing anyone?
And so if we forgot
Oh,
someone,
Eve Joan.
okay.
Eve
there you go.
Joan. I'm so sorry, Eve Joan. I got there. Eve Joan.
And so we hope that this conversation will continue in other formats. Betsy truly meant what she said. If you have other questions or concerns, feel free to contact her at her email address, which you have. And please, you guys can continue to talk. I do have to be someplace else this afternoon shortly. So thank you. And I will see all of you soon.
Are you turning off the camera?
I can leave it on for about another 7 minutes and then I need to actually go to another Zoom meeting.
My question was pertained to if people speak to each other personally and do not want to be on camera.
By all means, I think it's lovely when people talk to each other personally. And Eve Joan is an amazing educator. I would never want to forget her in all of this.
Where'd she go? Where'd she go?
Thank you all for joining us. This was a lovely attendance. Audrey, yes.
I particularly liked her mention of COVID keepers, that we should be thinking about the things that we have learned during this challenging time and how we can change our congregational life and our personal lives to the positive based on this.
Yes.
I would echo that and thank the congregation and thank you, Susan, very particularly for bringing me together with so many people, at least in my feeling, from coming into the services and from starting out with that month of Elul. That was very centering and it, It was wonderful.
Thank you.
It was useful. It was, sorry, my number of words has dropped significantly.
It's that COVID brain.
Well, whatever.
I think this discussion really confirmed that there's not a one size fits all either, that what works for some people, I know a certain person that gets reminded all the time to take time off, and that's may not be the answer for that person. But
Who might that be?
I worked for, my first boss was like that. He said, I just came to the doctor. He said, I've never met anybody that was more type A. I'm type A endocrinology. I'm type A, exoskeleton, type A everything. And he said, it works for me. So I think the key is to really find the things that work for you and then try and focus on those and not listen to somebody. So I like when she said, because I am troubled by people that, I'm troubled. I know it doesn't work for me, that say I'm going to shut that stuff off. I look and say, how can you be in this world and not know that today that same person says something else that doesn't work for me? So
I have one suggestion for Norm in that regard. What I try to do is no news Shabbat. And it's really a great thing. And it makes Shabbat something that I really look forward to in a whole new way.
Okay, well, I'm glad it works for you.
And for me, I find that while I need to know what's going on in the world, I can't have the news coming in through the television or through, I can only read it, because if I hear it, the stress levels, the anxiety levels, am I yelling at whatever is bad? So for me, if I'm just reading it, it's a whole different thing than if I'm watching it.
Releases too. Okay.
I'm not calling on people. So
I would suggest there are 3 very good news sources, Jewish news sources that you get on your computer: the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, JTA, Tablet Magazine, and Allgemeiner. They are all Jewish sources from different perspectives. And if you're not familiar with any or all of them, I would highly recommend them as a worthwhile news source, not your only one, but worthwhile news sources, particularly since most mainstream media do not cover Jewish issues. And these are all Jewish-oriented platforms, if that's the right word, to really get an idea of what's happening with Jewish populations around the world.
I'm going to get back to Dr. Stone and what she said. And I think one of the takeaways for me is a more scientific explanation of things that I personally have noticed about myself. And even though I've taken courses on brain research and whatnot, I still felt that she was able to very simply, and Jess Plotkin helped, and I have to thank her. They were both very helpful in explaining it in plain language very efficiently. So that's my takeaway.
Hearing about mental trauma is a new learning experience for me. I mean, I go back to historically the trauma of when I was in the military, combat trauma and post-combat trauma and so forth, physically. But learning about mental trauma and the effects and the challenges is a whole new learning experience for me, which I greatly appreciate.
Jean.
I found that, especially before the election, I had to tune out all of the ads for all of the political ads, because I'd want to throw something at my TV. My anxiety level rose so high, but flat screen TVs are not good to throw things at. And
no.
So just to get away from that was something I needed to do.
Okay.
I think a couple things. One, she didn't mention it, but it's not really yoga. One thing that's really helped me and helped some other people, I think too, is some form of meditation, particularly gratitude meditations, because we have so much we're dealing with. But if we think about every day, what are we grateful for? You know, or another meditation I do, which is compassionate breathing. Breathe in compassion for me, breathe out compassion for someone else. You know, I don't know whether she doesn't do those things, but yoga is really not the same as meditation. Meditation, and there's so many forms of meditation. The second thing I want to say is, I do think, and Nancy, I heard you when you were speaking about old traumas and then new stuff, is that my friends that are psychotherapists tell me their practices have never been so busy as right now. So there is professional help out there to help us if we need it to deal with what we're dealing with, you know. So those are two things I want to say.
And I'll just add to that. I'm putting in the chat gratitudedays.com. We are a partner of that right now. It is a 6-month program that's going to go on until Shavuot. So please join in you can join in individually, and it's an incredible program that's going to be taking place with daily materials for you to practice your daily gratitude and your weekly gratitude. And in terms of psychotherapy, one of the nice things now, because of, Zoom's been going on. I've had programs with Zoom way before COVID. And it's why Jewish educators have been able to be so helpful to so many people, because we've been using it for years and years for our meetings. But that psychotherapy now is you don't have to have a local therapist, that they are now licensed in a lot of ways to be doing things around the country. You can have a therapist in California or New York or wherever. You don't have to have one locally. So just know that piece of information as well. They can practice around the country at this moment. So there's more people available. I'm going to call on Stan, and then I have to get to my B'nai Mitzvah family that I'm supposed to be meeting with. Cantor's already with them.
Well, then I'm going to say this very quickly. She's calling attention to the fact that our brain is changing, and that's a good thing, because our environment is dramatically changing, and it's changing rapidly. And if our brain, incidentally, was not flexible enough to adjust to the situation, then as far as our existence as a species is concerned, it would be very limited.
Yes, so gratitude for neuroplasticity. Excellent, I love it. Thank you all. Sorry I have to boot you off, but I gotta go to my next appointment.
Bye-bye, Muriel.
Susan.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.